They called me crazy, so I exposed their secret empire and burned it to the ground, and then. I'm Marley, 32, and I live alone in a modest second-story apartment tucked just outside the edge of Grayford, where the nights are still enough to hear your own thoughts echo off the walls. My place isn't glamorous. It's filled with second-hand furniture, sun-faded curtains, and that scent that flips daily between lavender oil and someone downstairs burning meatloaf. But it's mine, and more importantly, it's quiet. I work remotely for a beauty brand that prides itself on clean ingredients and a borderline cult-like online presence. But the hours are flexible, the expectations predictable, and that's how I like it. Low risk, low noise, low everything. I don't keep much of a social calendar, and I never have. Not because I don't like people, but because I've learned, with hard-earned certainty, that people like my family can turn even a casual dinner into a weapon if you're not careful. Growing up in that house was like learning to smile with your teeth clenched. My mother, Camille, works PR for the city's mayor, and my father, Nolan, sits on the council board, the kind of man who believes that firm handshakes are proof of integrity. Neither of them ever raised their voice when angry. They just knew how to phrase things so that an apology could feel like a dagger between your ribs. Then there's my younger brother, Jonah, who arrived 2 years after me, but somehow came pre-installed with charisma, the kind that makes old women swoon and small children inexplicably obedient. Our parents adored him in the way stage parents adore the child who actually lands the lead role. They carted him around like proof that their legacy was secured, always introducing him at events like he was the future mayor-in-waiting. He studied nonprofit leadership at that overpriced college upstate and now fundraises for a national advocacy group. Suits always perfectly creased, words polished to a gleam, face locked into that public-facing version of warmth. I was never like them. I don't mean that bitterly. It's just the math of it. I didn't play the game well. I didn't network properly, didn't play along at galas, didn't smooth over awkward silences with anecdotes that made me sound charmingly flawed. Instead, I learned how to stay quiet in a room full of people who mistook volume for authority. No drama, no wild detours, just a consistent, clean record of showing up, getting the job done, and going home alone. But that never seemed enough. 2 years ago, I had what the world politely calls a moment during Christmas dinner at my parents' house. The evening was already thick with unspoken tension. The usual political jabs disguised as jokes, my mother's subtle eye rolls whenever I paused too long before answering something. Somewhere between the roast and the peppermint bark, I felt my chest clamp tight like it was being crushed from the inside. My ears rang. My vision tunneled. The chandelier overhead flickered, though the lights never actually dimmed. And before I could ask for help, I was outside, shaking, gasping, standing in the snow without a coat. I left without saying goodbye. No one called the next day. No one even texted. When I finally reached out, days later, my mother's response was, "You frightened everyone, Marley." That wasn't normal, and that was the full extent of her concern. No check-in, no curiosity, just a tidy verbal slap and a firm reminder that being inconvenient was never acceptable in our family. Since then, it's been death by 1,000 silences. Friends of the family who used to invite me out for coffee or send me casual texts just stopped replying. One of my cousins, Elise, who I'd grown up sharing everything with, faded out of my life without even a warning. It took me a while to realize it wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. The final puzzle piece came from work, of all places. One afternoon, my manager pulled me into a quick Zoom call, the kind where you can tell from her tone that she's trying to sound breezy while walking on glass. She mentioned an anonymous concern that had come into HR, someone claiming I might be in the middle of a mental health breakdown and could be a risk in high-stress situations. She brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell she was testing the water, watching my reaction. My blood went ice cold. They didn't believe it. Not really, but it had still been logged. Still existed somewhere on a file with my name attached, written by someone who knew how to sound just vague enough to avoid liability and just credible enough to leave a stain. And I knew exactly where that call had come from. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't march into my parents' house demanding answers. I just went quiet, like I always do. But this time, I started recording everything. I saved texts, screenshotted Instagram captions, backed up every voicemail. I turned my phone into a listening device during every forced family visit, and I archived conversations that felt too polished to be casual. I wasn't paranoid. I was finally paying attention. Months later, at a 4th of July barbecue I didn't want to attend but couldn't gracefully skip, I overheard my mother talking to a neighbor about her volunteer work in the mental health space. I knew that was bullshit. Camille had never volunteered for anything that didn't include press coverage and branded tote bags. Still, I looked it up. No affiliations. No local records. Nothing connected to her name in any nonprofit registry. What I did find, buried 3 clicks deep through an organization's barely maintained website, was a personal blog, linked by a generic profile signed with just 3 initials. One post used a phrase I'd heard my mother say more than once, usually while telling me how over-emotional people confuse drama with honesty. Emotional instability is not emotional truth. I Googled it just to see. One result: the blog. That was when I started organizing things into folders, not just mentally, but literally. Digital ones. One labeled Camille, another Jonah, another just strategy. I backed up every file to cloud storage and added physical notebooks to document my own memory. What happened, when, who said what, and how they said it. Because I didn't know when the next move was coming. But I knew, with absolute clarity, it would come. The message came on a rainy Tuesday morning, sandwiched between a shipping notification and an ad for office chairs. I almost didn't see it, just a short, awkward note from an account I didn't recognize, with no profile picture and a username I didn't remember. It read, "You're not imagining it. You should look into Jonah's finances." That was all. No hello, no context, no follow-up. When I clicked to reply, the account was already gone. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I moved. I didn't panic. I didn't even feel surprise. I just felt that sharp, stomach-deep drop you get when something you've suspected for months suddenly turns into fact. That night, I pulled out the plastic storage bin I kept under my bed, old tax returns, family documents, college paperwork, and a manila envelope with a printout of our grandparents' estate documents. I hadn't looked at them in years, but I remembered one line with photographic clarity. The trust was set to remain locked until Jonah and I turned 35. There were no exceptions, unless both of our parents agreed in writing and filed a notarized statement proving significant costs. I was 32. Jonah was 30. There had been no family emergency, no legal filing, no letters. But somehow, months earlier, he joked in our family group chat about finally investing like an adult and how the universe opens when you're strategic. At the time, I'd rolled my eyes and ignored it. Now, it read like a coded confession. Around that same window of time, my parents, who had always lived in comfortable but modest fashion, started upgrading everything they touched. Their worn leather couch was replaced by something custom-made with Italian stitching. The dining room got a chandelier imported from somewhere with too many syllables to pronounce. Camille's social media posts shifted tone from civic pride to quiet luxury, filled with words like intentional living and sustainable elegance, always tagged from places that didn't scream middle-class salary. I ran the numbers quietly in my head. Even combined, their jobs wouldn't cover that kind of spending surge, not unless something had changed. That night, I went back to the blog Camille always linked in her posts about mental health and generational healing. Using a domain tool I'd learned to use through a digital marketing workshop, I traced its purchase history. It had been bought a year ago, not under Camille's name, but under a shortened version of Jonah's online handle, tied to an address I recognized from his college years. The trail wasn't even hidden, it was just lazy. At that point, I stopped watching and started acting. I remembered an old thread Jonah had posted years ago about launching a mentorship program through a family foundation. We didn't have a foundation. I dismissed it back then as another one of his self-promotional schemes. But I found the post again. It linked to a form still live, buried behind a Google Docs login, filled with vague promises of career coaching and exclusive access. I created a burner email under a fake name and filled out the form. 2 days later, I received a cheerful response from someone named JL, welcoming me to an unpaid internship and requesting a $200 administrative processing fee, payable via personal PayPal. There was no corporate account, no legal documentation, no traceable entity, just a polite scam wrapped in a mentorship bow. I screenshotted everything and sent it to the only person who might know more, the anonymous sender from before. I still had their deleted handle. Using a side account I kept for monitoring work competition, I tracked down a college friend of Jonah's who still had them tagged in old posts. I sent a message, careful with my wording, just that I was trying to understand a message I'd received and would appreciate context if any was available. No pressure, no accusation. 2 days later, a reply came in. No phone call, no real conversation. Just a zip folder of files, screenshots of group messages, voice memos, old photos, and a bullet point list. The sender was Cole, a roommate Jonah had in college. They'd stayed in touch for years afterward, until, according to the message, Jonah changed from charming to dangerous. The files painted a clear picture. Jonah had been bragging for years about leveraging assets and creative funding streams. He once told Cole, during a drunk conversation, that he'd figured out a loophole in the trust, just needed 2 signatures and a little persuasion. There was even a recording, muffled but audible, of Jonah laughing about people who never read the fine print. That night, I pulled out everything I'd been collecting, every screenshot, every voicemail, every message from Camille about how she missed her sweet girl. One of those messages had come just 2 hours after I received the fake internship response, inviting me to a healing dinner with the family. I hadn't responded. I just saved the timestamp. I went through our old group chats again. 6 months earlier, Jonah had sent a message with a laughing emoji. When you play the long game right, even the past pays off. No one responded at the time. Now it felt like a breadcrumb he'd dropped to see who was watching. I wasn't just watching now, I was documenting. I reached out to 2 women who had commented on a vague post I made in a closed forum months back. Both responded privately. The first was a grad student in Vermont who had paid $300 for what she believed was a virtual nonprofit internship with connections to a national advocacy network. She received a welcome email and a login to a password-protected portal that never worked. After 3 unanswered follow-ups, she gave up. The second was a 19-year-old who applied through an Instagram account Jonah used to run under his mentorship alias. She never heard back after paying her fee. The receipts matched the PayPal ID from my fake application. I documented their messages, anonymized the details, and saved copies in a new folder I labeled simply, Intern Fraud. That same week, my therapist Lena helped me draft a formal summary of my mental health record, dates, diagnosis, none, and confirmation of emotional stability, all verified by her professional license. I wasn't compiling this evidence for revenge. I wasn't looking for pity. I was building a structure out of truth, something they couldn't burn down just by calling me fragile. I sent everything to my lawyer. Well, not my family's lawyer. I found someone 3 cities over, someone with no connection to Grayford, no ties to the council, no reason to pretend neutrality. I attached the estate documents and asked one question. Could my brother have accessed the trust without breaking the law? The response came 2 days later in a voice so calm it sounded rehearsed. There was only one path to early access, he confirmed. Both parents had to sign off, in writing, with cause. No loopholes. No backdoors. If Jonah got access, Nolan and Camille helped him. The timeline fell into place too easily. Jonah's new watch. Camille's spa retreat in Sedona. Nolan suddenly attending real estate seminars in the name of civic engagement. None of it was random. None of it was earned. They didn't just steal from the trust. They tried to bury me while they did it. And I'd let them think they succeeded, until now. The moment I realized they were afraid wasn't during a confrontation. It was a silence, precise and unnatural. 3 days after I forwarded the trust paperwork to my lawyer, Camille sent a message out of nowhere asking if I wanted to grab tea and reset. No apology, no reference to anything specific, just an oddly timed offer of peace after months of carefully curated distance. I didn't respond. I copied the text, time-stamped it, and backed it up with everything else. Later that week, Jonah showed up at my door without warning. Knocking like this was some casual sibling drop-in, like he hadn't ghosted me for over a year. He wore one of those soft, casual sweaters people use when they're trying to look approachable on camera, but his eyes moved fast, scanning the hallway, like he expected a witness. I didn't invite him inside. I stood at the door and kept my phone screen down on the table, camera recording the entire thing from 5 feet away. He opened with charm. Of course he did. Said he'd heard things had gotten a little messy, and he wanted to make sure there wasn't any confusion about what was real. His tone was soft, calm, almost patronizing. I didn't say much. I let him talk, let him wrap his lies in smiles, and let the recording catch every word. Then, about halfway through, his tone shifted. "You know," he said, like it was an afterthought. "People who dig too deep into other people's affairs tend to lose credibility fast." He smiled right after, as if to soften the threat, but I already had it logged. That sentence alone earned its own folder. Before he left, he handed me a file folder, thick with printed pages and bent at the corner. Inside were testimonials, allegedly from interns who'd worked with him, all praise and exaggerated gratitude. One had a visible watermark from a stock image site. Another listed a professional development agency that didn't exist anywhere online. The formatting was off. Fonts changed mid-paragraph. Metadata from one file revealed it had been created 48 hours earlier in a different time zone. I sent the folder to a woman I knew from an online digital forensics group, someone who worked in metadata recovery and fraud detection. She confirmed what I already suspected. Half the documents were altered versions of templates freely available online, some created using burner editing software designed for cheap business scams. One image, allegedly from a past mentorship event, had a building in the background that hadn't existed until 6 months ago. That same night, another anonymous message landed in my inbox. It contained a forwarded email chain, Camille corresponding with an old family friend, someone who hosted book clubs and charity brunches and always smiled a little too hard when she saw me. The emails were a script, guidance on how to bring up my panic attack at dinner without sounding too harsh. Camille's phrasing was exact. Use strategic honesty. Only share what makes you look compassionate. The rest doesn't need to be said. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, there was loud knocking at my door. 2 men with government IDs from the local crisis response unit. They said someone had filed a report about a woman, expressing concerning mental behavior. They expected a breakdown. Instead, I handed them a printed packet containing my evaluation records, police report copies, therapy logs, and the voicemail from Camille where she called me a burden and said I thrived on chaos. They apologized, took my name off their list, and left looking more uncomfortable than I felt. That was the last moment I waited for things to settle. I contacted a journalist I'd been following for months, Harper, who had written 3 major pieces on reputation laundering in small towns. I didn't give her names. I just said I had materials, verified and timestamped, that involved potential financial misconduct and public image manipulation. She responded the same day. I sent her a secure link with redacted screenshots, one anonymized audio clip, and a list of questions I still hadn't answered myself. 3 days later, she replied that 2 other journalists had reviewed the material and wanted to speak off record. I agreed to a call. In preparation, I created a separate drive folder, organized, stripped of anything emotional, labeled by incident type, and verified with digital trails. I wanted the evidence to speak for itself. During that call, I learned something else. Someone else had started talking. My cousin Elise reached out again, this time not as a confused relative, but as a potential witness. She told me that after I stopped attending family gatherings, Camille warned people that I was fragile, erratic, and might lash out if cornered. Elise admitted she believed it at the time, not because I'd ever shown that behavior, but because no one ever questioned Camille. After we met at a neutral cafe 2 towns over, I sent her 2 files. The first was Camille's voicemail calling me unstable. The second was a recording of her recent dinner invitation, calling me her pride. Elise messaged me the next day with 6 words I didn't expect. "This is disturbing. I believe you." That same week, Harper published a regional piece under the title The Family Brand. It didn't name us, but the timeline was clear: references to trust access, nonprofit scams, and public statements crafted to discredit one daughter while propping up the son. Within hours, local forums lit up. People started posting old holiday photos. One person uploaded a side-by-side of Camille's wellness blog next to the internship emails from Jonah's burner account. The phrasing was nearly identical. That night, I posted one clip to my private account. A recording of Jonah laughing on the phone, saying, "Nobody ever believes the crazy girl anyway," followed by another anonymous audio file where Camille says, "She's just emotional. It's not truth." The clip ended with a screenshot of the internship welcome email. The next morning, the blog Camille used to promote her advocacy went offline. Too late. Internet sleuths had already archived the full site. A digital trail connected the domain to an apartment Jonah had lived in during college. That same trail showed Nolan's city-issued email had been used to register 2 other domains, both allegedly tied to community mental wellness projects, neither of which had any formal registration. Soon after, I received a call from a woman whose daughter had received a strange email, an invite to a scholarship mentorship from Camille, using a personal Gmail account. The school had no record of any partnership. The program listed didn't exist. The branding was an exact match to Jonah's fake internship documents. I added all of it to the folder. I didn't threaten. I didn't accuse. I just organized. Then, I sent a controlled leak, just enough to 2 journalists and a public ethics watchdog account. I included metadata trails, timestamps, partial screenshots. No names. No claims. Just proof that something real was unraveling. And then I wrote in my journal, "Let them sweat. If they think this is the worst of it, they're not ready for what I haven't shown yet." The truth didn't unravel all at once. It frayed slowly, thread by thread, until the entire mask fell apart. 2 days after the partial leak, someone on a data forensics subreddit exposed Jonah's mentorship alias, linking it directly to an IP address tied to his personal gaming account. The posts weren't subtle. One user connected that alias to other digital fingerprints, fake freelance listings, inflated consulting offers, unpaid service packages, all under the same pattern of vague promises and vanished follow-up. Screenshots began circulating like wildfire. That same night, I received a message from my attorney. Someone inside city government had confirmed that Nolan, my father, was placed on administrative leave. No press release. No fanfare. Just a quiet suspension while they reviewed a flagged investigation involving the misuse of government-issued devices. He had used his city email to register nonprofit domains linked to Camille's blog network. We had already archived that detail, but now it was confirmed through official inquiry. The next blow didn't come from the government. It came from my workplace. I was pulled into a secure meeting with IT and HR, both looking more serious than I'd ever seen them. Over the past 2 weeks, multiple remote login attempts had been made on my work device during early morning hours. None of them had succeeded, but one was traced back to a public library just 10 miles from my parents' house. The user account used for access? Registered in Nolan's full name. They weren't just defaming me now, they were trying to digitally mirror me. I updated my security settings immediately. 2-factor authentication, password rotation, cloud encryption with time blocks. Then I bought a second phone and kept it powered off, in case I ever needed to vanish digitally for a day. My lawyer advised I document everything, including the breach attempts. My therapist offered to write a formal psychological summary to attach to the growing evidence file. I scanned it, archived it, and stored it in the verified section of my master folder. Then came the flash drive. My cousin Elise had gone digging through her mother's attic, sorting through boxes of things from our grandfather's estate. She found a sewing table, one of those antique pieces with a false back panel. Tucked behind it, wedged between 2 rusted hinges, was a flash drive labeled in our grandfather's handwriting, "Guard this." She hadn't opened it. She mailed it to me without a return address. When it arrived, I plugged it in with shaking hands. The contents were simple, but devastating. A scanned letter, dated just 2 months before he passed, handwritten and unfiltered. A folder labeled estate records. And another, password protected, marked for legal use only. The letter explained what I already feared, that my grandfather had suspected Nolan and Camille were grooming Jonah to take control of the family legacy. He wrote that certain financial decisions were being made without proper review, and that he feared the trust was being misused. His final line was clear. If you're reading this, it means they've buried too much. Don't let them bury the truth. My attorney cracked the encrypted folder in less than 2 minutes. Inside were scanned estate documents, original drafts with annotations in our grandfather's handwriting, and 6 audio recordings. One stood out immediately, a tense conversation between him, Camille, and Nolan. The audio was grainy but clear enough. They were asking to expedite Jonah's access to the trust, citing vague terms like momentum and alignment. He resisted, firmly. At one point, Camille said, "You're being paranoid. Marley won't do anything. They already think she's fragile." And Nolan responded with something colder. "If you won't sign, we'll find another way." That phrase echoed for hours in my head. The recordings alone were enough to trigger a review by the estate board. They froze all activity on the trust immediately. A third-party auditor was assigned to oversee every transaction dating back 5 years. Meanwhile, Camille's public accounts went dark. Jonah's LinkedIn was deleted. Nolan's counsel listing now read, "Inactive pending review." For the first time, they didn't respond with spin or denial. They just disappeared. Then came the performance. A week after the exposure broke wider, my family posted a carefully staged video. Camille, Nolan, and Jonah, seated on their pristine white couch, dressed in soft grays and blues, all delivering lines like seasoned actors. Camille cried halfway through. Nolan spoke with gravitas, like a professor explaining a misunderstanding. Jonah nodded quietly, face folded into the perfect mask of remorse. They never said my name, but the references were obvious. Our daughter, her pain, her version of events. A masterclass in manipulation, wrapped in pastel tones and vague apologies. I didn't respond with words. I responded with documents. I posted a digital comparison, 2 columns. On the left, their public statements. On the right, dated evidence. Audio clips, domain registrations, screenshots of PayPal requests, trust access forms, a side-by-side of Jonah's mentorship message and Camille's blog post about wellness. I didn't add commentary, just facts. People didn't need my voice, they needed the truth. By the end of that week, Camille's nonprofit was listed as under review for registration inconsistencies on the state site. Someone screen captured the notice before it was taken down, and the image spread faster than any blog post she'd ever written. 2 of her upcoming speaking engagements were canceled. Jonah's name was quietly removed from 3 charity partner lists. Nolan's office had nothing to say. Then came the last wave of attacks. Not from them directly, but from burner accounts, all newly created, all trying different tones. Some acted like friends, saying I was hurting myself by making this public. Others were blunt threats. One message read, "You'll regret this. Stay quiet or else." I logged every single one. My lawyer filed a new report. I updated my home security with cloud backups and installed encryption software on every device I owned. I wasn't scared. I was ready, because I still hadn't used everything. And they still didn't understand how much I had left. Everything moved faster after that, like the whole house of cards had finally been hit with the right gust. One morning, I woke to an email from a local paper, the Grayford Times, with a subject line that read simply, "Inquiry, Statement Request." Attached was a draft of an exposé titled Inheritance, Image, and Silence, a town's perfect family cracks. My name wasn't in it yet, but everything else was. The timeline was mine. The financial movements. The fraudulent nonprofit entries. They had connected all the dots publicly, and people were watching now. Later that afternoon, I received a quiet message from a woman who used to work in Nolan's office. She told me she was willing to go on record. She described him as a man who used empathy like camouflage, who knew how to reframe manipulation as leadership and weaponized calm tones to discredit criticism. She also confirmed he had asked her to proofread documents with unusual metadata during her last year there, documents that she now recognized from screenshots in the article. Meanwhile, Harper followed up on her earlier coverage. She reached out again with a simple ask, a formal statement, signed or anonymous, outlining everything in my words. I didn't hesitate this time. I worked with my therapist and my attorney, structured a document that laid out the entire chain: panic attack, isolation, anonymous reports, digital tracing, financial review, and finally, the flash drive. I didn't add drama. I didn't editorialize. I labeled every page, linked every source, embedded every audio file with clean titles and time-stamped context. At the end, I signed it, Marley. The piece published 48 hours later. Within a day, the post had been shared over 200,000 times. Readers from outside Grayford started asking questions. Advocacy groups reposted it under headlines like gaslighting, gatekeeping, and the legacy machine, and when image is a weapon. My employer emailed me personally, reaffirming their support. The CEO included direct contact for mental health services and asked if I wanted to speak internally about resilience. Then came the job offers. Over the next 5 days, I received emails from nonprofits, communications firms, and 2 investigative groups offering positions in ethics, digital security, and internal analysis. Some included relocation packages. One wanted to help fund an independent documentary on workplace gaslighting. I didn't respond to any of them right away. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. I was measuring the damage and deciding what I wanted to carry forward. Then something changed. A new anonymous tip came in, an email forwarded through the same secure channel as before. It included a family group chat thread between Camille, Nolan, Jonah, and 2 family friends. They were drafting talking points for any future interviews, carefully coaching Jonah on tone and expression. One message read, "Keep him soft, regretful, not defensive. Avoid aggressive phrasing." Another note said, "Frame it as misunderstanding, never denial. If she escalates, we pivot to concern." The subject line of the email was, "Staying on the same page." That phrase stuck with me for hours. Later that evening, a podcast that covers abuse of public power asked to feature my story anonymously. I agreed under conditions: no names, no faces, just structure. I sent them a cleaned version of the evidence tree and recorded a voiceover using altered filters. The episode aired under the title "How to Disappear Someone Without Touching Them." The response was overwhelming. Dozens of listeners reached out, some in legal fields, some survivors themselves, offering support, legal strategy, and even database tracing for future protection. That same week, I posted a final public document to my account. It included a full timeline, a spreadsheet of funds tracked from the trust, receipts of anonymous payments, comparison screenshots of Camille's blog against the fake internship language, audio logs of manipulated narratives, and confirmation of my psychological evaluations. I organized it all under one banner: structure versus story. No accusations, just documented, sequential truth. I didn't need to argue anymore. Their words collapsed under the weight of their contradictions. After that post, the collapse went public. Camille's nonprofit was formally dissolved following a fraud audit. Jonah was blacklisted from multiple partner networks. Nolan's ethics board posted a quiet update, under investigation for misuse of city resources, including falsified domain activity and attempted digital breaches. They issued a temporary public leave. His name vanished from the city's website by Monday. Their video apology was quietly removed from every platform. And then, for the first time, silence. No emails. No new burner messages. No statements. Just digital retreat. But by then, it didn't matter anymore. I had already won. Weeks later, I moved. A small town 2 hours from Grayford, near the edge of a lake, in a rented house with overgrown ivy and quiet streets. I don't use my last name publicly anymore. I consult part-time for digital safety nonprofits. My circle is small, intentional, and drama-free. Elise visits sometimes. She brings old photos she rescued from her mother's attic. Ones where I'm still smiling, still unedited. We've started adding captions in ink. Names, dates, Context. Truth. Sometimes people still reach out, strangers, mostly, asking how I kept it together, how I stayed calm, how I didn't lose my mind in all the gaslighting and silence. And I tell them the only thing I know for sure. They built a legacy out of illusions and fear. I built a folder, and mine is still standing.